Bonjour, welcome to We See Each Other. This is an Indigenous podcast brought to you by Indigenous artists, creative people, and just altogether people who really want to hear authentic Indigenous experiences, values, life stories, and cultural practices. I brought forth a team of wonderful Indigenous people, and we're going to talk about real representation and how Indigenous people are portrayed in media, especially when it's written by non-Indigenous people. And so right now, I have with me two lovely guests, Leah Thompson and Manny Luna. So if you two just want to introduce yourselves and we can just hear where you're from, that'd be awesome.
All right. I guess I'll start us off. So that is name Manny Najek Apache yo Germany ho hi na wishali yo Santa Barbara Etchi. So hello. My name is Manny. I am Cherokee Apache and also with Germany, and I'm from Visalia, California, but now I live in Santa Barbara.
Awesome. Good to have you, Manny.
OCO, I'm Leah. I am from Oklahoma, the Tulsa area. I am part of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma.
Cool. Good to have you too. So let's just really get into it. I mean, this is Halloween, a couple of days before Halloween, so I think really the topic here should be horror. And I don't know about you, but I'm a big horror fan stuff. But I really love watching like horror films and reading horror comics and just kind of even playing some horror video games. And I see a lot of misrepresentation about Indigenous people out there. So I wanted to hear more on your thoughts about that, and if you two are, big horror fans as well.
I know I was practically raised on horror. Some of my first video games I got into were horror. I think this is a really important topic because I feel like our culture is something that is misrepresented in horror a lot of times.
Yeah, I could really echo that too. I've been into horror since I was a small child. I remember being scared of Chucky when I was growing up, trying to jump as far away from the bed as possible and just closing the door, right behind me. I'm like, all right, I'm safe now. But, I just love everything horror. I'm a really, really big horror fan growing up, especially in video games too. I do Twitch now, and I'm a really big reacting type of person, so people love just watching me scream. And each time I get a new follower, it really scares me. But overall, I just love horror films, the books, video games, all that jazz. And just native representation in horror, video games, films, books, and just in general isn't really much talked about, and I think we need to start bringing up that conversation because, we don't want to be a novelty, especially inside horror, and I love horror, so it's like, we need to talk about that, so that's why I'm here, hey?
Yeah, I'm so grateful the two of you are here because it's, I feel like horror goes in a lot of Indigenous communities. I went to a horror convention with my family like a month ago, and we were pretty safe, but we were there and there was a lot of people selling books about Indigenous culture, and I asked them, like, did you have any input from like actual Indigenous people, or do you come from Indigenous like ties? And they said, no. We just did our own research and we liked the idea of this creature, and so we made our own twist on it. And I looked at them and I said, so you had no actual Indigenous input on this, and now you're going to try to sell it and make money? That's a little insulting, don't you think? And then they looked at me like I was the weird one, and I was like, whoa, okay. All right, let's just take a step back. What's in your book? And they're like, well, it starts on an old Indian burial ground that they tear down. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. The old trope of that, where it's haunted because it's on an Indian burial ground. And I feel like we see that in a lot of things, Stephen King uses that trope a lot. And that's kind of problematic for me because it's like, well, we should respect our ancestors, but at the same time, like, don't just use that as an excuse for all these horrible, like, ghost things to happen.
Especially on that topic, there's a couple things, because I'm very lucky. Right after you offered for me to do this with you. My little sister actually started working on a novel. Like I said, we're Cherokee, and we were raised on a couple tales, and she's actually doing a modernized version of one of the tales we were raised on. And I'm very excited. It's turning out really good. And it makes me think about Indigenous voices within media. But then jumping to your next point, every time I see the Indian burial ground, I don't want to call it a trope, but the way a lot of authors use it, it's a trope.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like they forget what sacred means, because they say, "Oh, it's haunted," and it's like, well, this energy isn't always negative. These are our ancestors, and yeah, I feel like there's a lot of miscommunication, and they just took the negative side of it.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. I feel like we do hold a lot of spiritual power, and where we bury our people, and it just kind of twists that to their own gain. I don't know. Just to me, is a little insulting.
Yeah, most definitely. I kind of feel like a lot of the horror industry in general just kind of dehumanizes Indigenous people more than what people kind of really realize, because a lot of people, whenever they enter into either a book or a novel or some type of story, either it being written or visual or even spoken stories too, there's just a lot of kind of just I want to be here to get scared, but they don't actually realize the negative effects it has on Indigenous people by not only appropriating our culture just for a quick buck or for their own version of storytelling without any Indigenous people's voices, because it furthers, it's a bigger issue that we need to discuss, and it furthers kind of the misrepresentation, especially in the entertainment business overall. In regards to the Indian burial ground, it's okay, why does every horror film have to take place on an Indian burial ground, I'm thinking about Stephen King's, Pet Cemetery, and I was like, oh yeah, this is an Indian burial ground, and if you put an animal there, they'll come back to life into this zombie, and it's all right, I understand Stephen King. I read many of his novels, I'm not going to lie. I read a lot of them and all that stuff, especially as a high schooler, and that was the thing that actually got me into reading. And whenever they're in the library, I was like, hey, Stephen King, I heard about his name and read his books. And bottom line, it seems like he's trying to, appropriate our culture, I'm pretty sure that might not be his intention. It might be his intention. I don't know. I never met the guy, but he's not really being a good ally. Because everyone likes to say that they're a good Indigenous ally, but if they're a colonized ally, then they're just as bad as somebody who's going against Indigenous people,
Exactly. I don't like Stephen King because I do feel like he has these racist tendencies, and just the portrayal of Native people and Native culture isn't actually very good to us. I don't know. Have either of you ever read Firestarter?
My family has. Mom loves Stephen King books, so we have all of that.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
That was one of the things we got introduced to very young, were his books, and that was when they started us on.
Yeah. Well, there's a character named John Rainbird who's Cherokee, and Stephen King writes about this character who's obsessed with this little girl who can start fires with her brain. And he says that he loves her, and then he ultimately wants to kill her because that's the only that would be the ultimate pleasure. And so I did research on it because there was a Firestarter movie starring Drew Barrymore, and the character John Rainbird is in it, but is not portrayed by an Indigenous person, but he does wear a lot of fringe, which is a little weird. So I just, and that's not the only example. Natives are talked about they were wiped out by it, but other than that, it just gives the impersonation that there's not any Indigenous people now. You know what I mean? We're all dead.
Yeah.
And we're just a thing from the past. And then I just watched Dreamcatcher the other day, and I had no idea what the revelation of of like these aliens fighting this war. That's a lot of grossness, and then all of a sudden there's a dream catcher, and I was like, okay, cool, thank you, Stephen King. That's something.
Oh my gosh! Like, I'm glad you brought up It, because it seems like in a lot of horror films, not only in Stephen King's films and novels, but just overall, it always has the white main character, you know, being like, oh, I heard this from the local Indian tribes, you know, and I'm going to do this ceremony and I'm going to save the day, you know, and that's how it always ends, you know. It's like, well, the white savior comes in, you know, and saves the day while appropriating indigenous cultures. They're suddenly, you know, a master of all spiritualisms, because that's how it tends to go down. And that's what kind of happened in It, you know, and especially in the novels too, and well, the novels and the movies, you know, and they just really just kind of like, all right, we're just gonna do this, and we're just gonna do this ancient ceremony in order to make sure it gets captured and stuff like that, which really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm just like, wow, okay, another white savior, great.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think that's the best way to put it, especially that part of it. The fact that the indigenous people had done this ceremony, and now, like you said, the white saviors are coming in, redoing it, and saving the world by doing it. It's an interesting, but with a parentheses bad after it.
Yeah. There's a lot of that going around, and it's not just like, do the rain dance and make the ghost go away as put by a non-indigenous person. It's also smudging, the use of smudge. Like a lot of shows, and even American Horror Story did this, where they're like, oh, just go get some sage and just wave it around and your ghost will be gone. And then it's often made fun of after. Like, oh, you dumb idiot, you went and you actually did this and nothing happened because it's not real. And it's like, well, no. In my family, we take smudging very seriously. Like, you know, there's things you do to smudge, and it actually helps you. And it's been proven, like, it takes care of, like, antibacterial things out of the air, and it makes your air, like, healthier. So, just another example of, like, how non-indigenous people use our culture to, like, make it seem kooky or, you know.
The real American Horror Story is their, what do they call them? Their, smudge stick kits that they buy from Spencer's in the mall for $8.99.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, I've seen those. I'm like, cool, you just sold my culture in a small plastic bag.
Yeah.
I love that.
There's something that always, especially when you talk about, like, the paranormal culture, I see people always pulling out smudge sticks, and I'm like, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, and
it's just like, I watch them light the whole bundle, and at least that's not how my family does it.
No, and I definitely don't want to be like a cultural gatekeeper, like, but I feel like if you're gonna do something like that, you should, like, try to learn it from indigenous people in a respectful way and ask in a respectful way, and not just assume this knowledge because you watched it off of, like, this horror TV show, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to put out there, like, the last thing I want to do is be a gatekeeper or say, like, you know, this isn't good. But at the same time, I do want to bring awareness to how many non-indigenous people get away with just appropriating our culture. And so...
It's an important idea of appropriation versus appreciation.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's a big aspect of this conversation.
Yeah, and that's really the whole reason why I wanted to start this whole series of podcasts, because there will be more episodes after this one, is like just to bring awareness to that, and then bring attention to indigenous artists who are trying to, like, make money by, like, creating these stories or these movies, and they definitely deserve that financial support because they're making these authentic, you know, things for us to enjoy. And we should be supporting them instead of, like, another Stephen King, who I feel is just, like, a millionaire anyways, you know? He's made plenty of money making stories off of our culture.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, you guys ever hear of Deer Woman?
This is when I actually learned about doing research.
Do you not have Deer Woman down there?
I don't know how I've never heard of this.
Oh, okay. I don't know if it's just like an Ojibwe thing, but I don't know. I thought it was pretty common. Manny, do you have like a version of Deer Woman out there?
Actually, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know much about Deer Woman. I know from my area, all I know about is Bigfoot, the little people, and the gnomes.
Oh, okay.
And also some water baby stories too. But yeah, Deer Woman. I first came across that because my friend was telling me about it. Because I was like, Deer Woman. I was like, who's that? And they were just telling me the story, some of the stories a while back. But yeah, I'm still new to that. To that subject right there.
Oh, okay. Well, for our listeners, Deer Woman is she's a beautiful woman. She's got long hair. She wears a really long skirt, and she often lures young men who are gonna do sketchy things away from the campfires, or if they ask her to get into their car for activities, she usually goes with. And these men, sometimes they're never found again, but sometimes they are found and they have been stomped to death because Deer Woman, I'm getting chills. She has deer feet, for feet. And she has, in some cases, she has antlers that you can see, and she's actually she's supposed to be, from what I think is a metaphor for our missing and murdered Indigenous women. How many women just get taken from these public places and we never see them again. And so I feel like that's the where she kind of sprung out from. Leah and I read The Only Good Indians, which is a story, a written novel by Stephen Graham Jones. And I don't know how far you got, Leah, but I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I got a decent way in, and then, the philosophy student I took notes on, the first chapters.
Yeah!
I remember I pointed this book out. One thing that really stuck out to me was actually the reviews. I remember I told this to you, and I was really kind of excited to read this because not only was it about the Deer Woman, there were reviews talking about, from presumably not native reviewers, saying it was incomprehensible because of Indigenous slang. And that stood out to me, so I really wanted to read this book. And then I read my notes in the first chapter say, I don't get what people meant by that. And maybe that's just because I'm Indigenous and I know what they're saying.
Yeah. No, I definitely, I had that whole thought in my head when I was reading through it, and I was like, the only thing, and this is my thought, is, there's a character who, he's having a mental breakdown. And I feel like Stephen did such a good job of doing that from the character's perspective. You get lost in what is this real or is this real? What's happening now? Oh, we're moving on from this theory. Such a short period of time that you're like, whoa, let's calm down, let's think about this, but you're still being led around on this irrational train of thought. And I said, that's good. I feel like that's good writing, because you get drawn into that panic, that anxiety of what's real, who's actually trying to hurt me, what's happening.
Exactly. I loved that scene. I thought the writing was impeccable. I thought, this is a book I'm going to read again and again.
Exactly. And I've enjoyed it, so I don't really see the criticism of I couldn't understand it. It's well, there's, it's a pretty easy read. It's well written. It draws you in. It's a pretty accurate, I haven't finished it. I'm really excited to finish it, but I've really enjoyed it so far.
And I can just echo that. I haven't finished it, but I'm very excited to finish it, just so I can start it again.
Right? So the funny story about that is I posted a photo of it on my Instagram story, because I do that now. And my friend Jonathan Thunder, who's an Ojibwe artist, he's a painter and animator, reached out to me and said, hey, Stephen Graham Jones actually got motivated by my rendition of Deer Woman, and then he sent me a picture of the painting of Deer Woman, and it's exquisite. And sat down and wrote this story because of my artwork. And I said, no way! And then he sent me the screenshot of Stephen Graham Jones, just saying, hey, Thunder, I really like your art, and I wrote this story because of it. And apparently they teamed up and they did a short collection with Stephen's words and Jonathan's artwork. And if you two have ever looked at Jonathan Thunder's artwork, it's so bizarre, but it just draws you in and it makes you really think. He does a lot of like insane artwork, and he's definitely worth like checking out.
You sent the link to his Instagram page, and I scrolled, and then Instagram was like, you have to have an account, and I found a way around that, and then I just kept scrolling, and I repeated that multiple times just to see more and more of his art. It was mind-boggling in the best way possible, the way he captures shape and color and dimension.
Yeah, and he sticks true to his indigenous roots, and I don't feel like he's ever exploited that. And I was like, well, you know, if there are indigenous artists to support, it would definitely be Stephen Graham Jones and Jonathan Thunder. And like, there's definitely more people out there, but like, on the topic of Deer Woman, I just wanted to point them out. And then I have written, have either of you seen Reservation Dogs?
Yes, I need to see it.
Yeah, Deer Woman makes an appearance in the episode Come and Get Your Love, and I loved it because I love that actress, and I thought she did such like a beautiful kind of like modern way of how Deer Woman's attitude would be. You know, she warns this little boy like, you know, don't be a mess up like these other guys and you won't ever see me again, you know, like just don't drink, don't you know, abandon your children, you know, just be a decent human being and like you'll never see me again. And he never sees her again, which I don't know. I like that.
Yeah, and you know, that's a really good point that you bring up too, because I remember seeing that episode on Reservation Dogs, and it's kind of like if I felt like if, say, Stephen King or another author or anybody who's not really aware of Deer Woman or just how Indigenous cultures work, you know, just in general, basically a non-Indigenous person, they would probably take Deer Woman and they would probably morph into just 100% monster. You know, like Deer Woman's just a straight up monster. You know, you can't trust Deer Woman. Deer Woman's like 100% evil, but Deer Woman does, you know, she protects. She's a protector. You know, from what I see. Of course, I'm speaking from somebody who didn't grow up with Deer Woman and like stories or anything like that, but I view Deer Woman as a protector and somebody. Deer Woman being somebody who helps other people in a good way, compared to how the westernized ideologies of horror films, which is like, oh, if somebody like kind of just protects somebody out of like, you know, either through whatever means or whatever, then they're automatically evil and they're from hell and they're the devil type of stuff, you know. But that's not always the case in a lot of our cultures.
It's so funny that you bring that up because I want to talk about this episode of Masters of Horror. It was like this TV show that ran on for a little bit. They did an episode of Deer Woman. The actress who portrays her is Brazilian. So she's not from like northern Indigenous. I watched the whole episode because I'm a masochist like that. It was badly written. It was badly directed. She shows up. She doesn't speak, which I feel like is a huge saying on how Indigenous women are portrayed. Like, they don't want Indigenous women speaking, I guess. And she wears this long buckskin dress, but it's got a huge V-neck, so it shows her cleavage. And then in one of the, at the very end of the episode, she just attacks and kills people for like no reason. And so at one of the episodes, the main character lifts up her skirt when she's unconscious to look at her feet. And I was horrified. I was like, whoa, no, hey, please don't. Why did someone think that this was okay? You know, like, it just felt very creepy and like very like rapey to me. And I was like, the whole point of Deer Woman is to protect against things like this. And so you let this happen. Like, you made this happen to her. I just felt like very like sick after watching that. Yeah, so I think it's funny because we have these like huge things in our culture that we know about, and then for non-Indigenous people to take that and do these kind of awful things is like, it's just weird to endure.
It's interesting. Again, interesting in the leaning towards the negative, because I was always taught our stories had, meaning. And when there was someone like Deer Woman or anything else we're going to talk about tonight, there was meaning. An aspect almost of Western horror is that it's senseless. So to take these stories that had meaning and had a lesson and had, different ways for our people to connect to them, and then put them in westernized horror. It's almost like taking the circle peg and cutting it to fit in the square hole.
Exactly. No, I feel like a lot of our circle ideas have been cut into different shapes, and we lose so much meaning and so much understanding with that. Speaking of actors who are not actually Indigenous, and I know this is a funny topic, so feel free to be brutally honest with me. Shapeshifters from Twilight. What are our thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh.
Oh no.
Oh, that, okay. So, who wrote that? Wasn't it?
It was Stephanie Meyer.
Stephanie Myers. I'm getting her confused with Suzanne Collins. Okay, I went through a Hunger Games phase. Anyway, that's a whole different story. Not Suzanne Collins. Stephanie Myers. When I was young, I was like, oh my gosh, Twilight. After I got older, I was just like, okay, like, you're kind of appropriating Indigenous cultures, and after just thinking about it and talking to my friends, that's when I started really finding out that what she did, she went to some Native people in the community over there in Washington, and she heard some of the stories, and they trusted her with some of the stories, and then they ended up being like, all right. She's like, all right, well, I'm going to write a book about this. I'm going to change a little bit of it so I don't have to pay you any money, and I'm not going to do anything for your reservation, your tribe, no credit, nothing like that. And so she really just milked Indigenous people of their, of that tribe's stories, the area's landscape and all that stuff without giving any proper credit, no money, or anything like that. And even the actors, from what I remember, some of them are not even like Indigenous, or doesn't have any roots or anything like that. Who played quote unquote the wolf pack? Stephanie Myers is not on my you're gonna be a good person type of list, because she just did what everyone else started doing and just like she took whatever she wanted from us, just like people have been doing for many, many years. Cough, cough. Modern day Columbus Day. Yeah,
and I don't agree with her portrayal of Native men as being angry, and the fact that I did this research. They're like top 10 Twilight couples, and it's the guy who ended up mauling his girlfriend's face. They end up pretty high on that list of being the most romantic couples, and I'm like, that's I don't know about you, but I think that's physical abuse. The fact that you portray Native men as just being abusive, because I think even, oh my gosh, now I'm losing his name. Jacob, he gets angry, and he tells Bella, like, I'm gonna go kill myself if you end up marrying Edward. And, like, against, it's emotional blackmail, and so she ends up kissing him, and it's just like, it's icky. It's icky.
Yeah. Twilight I was a Twihard back in the day. I loved the series. And then, kind of like what Manny said, I got older and I started looking a little harder. I didn't have to look that much harder to see the issues. It's also, if we want to talk about religiosity and how certain religions affect Native peoples, Twilight was religious propaganda. I think that also plays a huge aspect into why Indigenous people were portrayed the way they were.
And she definitely used the whole treaties. Like, she didn't go into the full history of treaties and just kind of used it as like, oh no, we made a deal with these cold faces and now we're gonna go live on this land and they can't come over here. And I was like, that's not how treaties were made, sweetie. But thanks for using treaties as a way to, like, justify why your white boyfriend can't go on the reservation. Cool.
Low-key, though, if I remember correctly, don't quote me, though, but I think she went to Forks, Washington, and then got inspired or something like that. And I've been to Forks. Let me tell you, that place is small, and the only thing she got inspired by while being there is the racism that goes on there. I have some stories from family members who know all about that place and stuff like that. And yeah, she just, just the way that she portrays Native men, like as you mentioned earlier too, about, Native men are abusive and stuff. And they really romanticize that, especially with the younger generation, which is not healthy. It wasn't healthy for people my age. Because I was in high school, I was in ninth grade when Twilight came out, and I remember after it came out, me being a native guy in high school in Visalia, which is a small city, people started really romanticizing me. Oh, they're like, oh, you're Native American, just fetishizing me and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, I am, and they're like, wow, you could be like my Jacob. I'm like, no. I'm like, get away from me. And then after a while, I was like, sorry, I have standards. And they're like, what? They're like, yeah. And I tell them, like, yeah, my standards is, you just going away. I was getting messed up, I got really irritated by that. So I know it hurt me as an Indigenous self-identifying male in high school, especially when Twilight came out, because I got fetishized a lot.
Yeah. I can definitely see that because I know a lot of Native men who were approached by non-Indigenous women who were like, I love your long hair, and would like start touching it without permission, which is a big no-no. Like, you don't do that. And
I just had the worst shiver go up my back when you said that.
Oh, yeah?
Just the fetishization.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of media plays into that, like, big Native strong dude, stoic, will protect you. And it's like, yeah, a lot of our Native dudes are like that, but a lot of them are like really goofy and like silly, and like, there's just like more than one portrayal of our Native men. So I'm not a big fan of Stephanie Meyer's, but Twilight always comes up, oddly enough, when it comes to horror, and I'm like, yeah, because it was a horrible book. Ha 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 ha. My little sister and I actually got into debate, and this was like just a few days ago. She's like, yeah, because they always want to portray Native men as werewolves. And I was like, no, they weren't werewolves, shapeshifters. And she's like, no, they were werewolves. And I was like, no, Stephanie Meyers went and said, like, no, they're shapeshifters who chose to be wolves. And I'm like, okay, well, we have shapeshifters in our culture, like, people who can turn into animals and stuff. But it's usually in, like, not a puberty rage-induced session to go fight vampires. It's something on a different level. And so it brings in the question of, and I feel so sorry, but it brings in the ideas of like people not knowing what shapeshifters are, people not knowing, and I'm gonna say a trigger word, and I am so sorry, skinwalkers. I feel like a lot of people don't know what skinwalkers are, and I feel like they don't know like the difference between skinwalkers and werewolves. And I'll get back to this idea of twisting an original idea by non-Indigenous people and making it into something else, because there's the last topic I want to talk about. Are you guys okay with talking about S-walkers? Because I'm not going to say the full thing now, just out of respect for our relatives.
I'm okay with talking about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with talking about it, and I think it probably does need to be talked about, especially for all those non-Indigenous viewers, or maybe those Indigenous viewers, who are going back to their roots, or just continuing on their journey, don't know much about it. I think it's an important thing for us to kind of bring up.
Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's important to bring up SWs, because I've seen so many. I talked about this a little bit when we were setting this up. I've seen TikTok accounts that talk about S-walkers. It's people like setting up like encounters. That's
not something I want to encounter.
I always check it. It's non-Indigenous people.
Personally, for me, I don't ever want to encounter S-walkers.
I can't sleep. If it'll come up in my For You page, I can't sleep after I watch one of them.
I feel like it's real horror instead of just like slasher films, and that's like the kind of aspect of it. S-walkers are defined as like a type of witch who can turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal, and they're usually out to do evil intentions, and it's not something you really want to run into like on purpose. But when I was researching this, I found a lot of people who wrote about this and didn't really bother to do their research.
Like always, eh?
Right. I found this one non-Indigenous author wrote 18 books in his Navajo book series that features S-walkers, and I'm like, I don't have the time or patience to really proofread this, but I feel like non-Indigenous people should maybe stop writing about this. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, and I'm gonna say the full, well, actually, you know what, I'm not. It's called S-walkers. It's a film made in 2006. It's written by a non-Indigenous author. It's really about two kinds of werewolves who are fighting against dominance of like who's gonna be the leading factor. One group likes to eat people and like hunt and do bad things, and the other people don't hunt humans and don't eat, and they're basically like they're vegetarian werewolves. But I'm like, that's not that's a werewolf. Those are werewolves. They even say it like, we're werewolves, and it's like, well, that's not really S-walkers then, is it? So you just took one thing, you took off the label, you painted it a different color, and then you put on that old label, but wrote it in a different way. I'm like, you can't do that. If I want pickles, I'm gonna eat pickles, and I don't want to open this jar and eat pears,
Yeah. It feels like if we're using the round peg, square hole analogy, still, S-walkers, shapeshifters, and werewolves, it feels like they took the Play-Doh of the round peg, smushed it all together, mixed it up to where they don't even know which is which, and then put it into the hole.
Yeah, and it's like, well, what is this? Sifting through all this stuff just to figure out which is really which, and it's like, well, okay, alright. And I know that there's a ranch down somewhere where it's like the popular place to do paranormal research, and I'm like, I love researching paranormal stuff and supernatural stuff and all sorts of stuff, respectfully. I always go with cedar in my shoes. I always smudge myself before and after, and I always carry salt with me. Is that perhaps cheating? Perhaps. I don't really care. But I would never go to that ranch. If you told me, hey, there's some S-walkers hanging over here, and we could see one, I'd be like, I will not go with you, and I'm gonna go do something else with my time. Thank you very much. Have a good life.
Good luck and goodbye.
Exactly. That's just not something I'm interested in experiencing myself. And I don't understand the need for non-Indigenous people who want to, they go out and they're like, oh, but my horse was spooked. And I was like, your horse probably has better intuition than you, and you should probably trust that animal.
Those people might not be that smart. The thing about non-Indigenous people is sometimes they're just so drowned into just what is best for me? What do I want? They also like to cherry pick other cultures, and there's some type of romanticizing and just wow, native culture is like a shiny Pokemon. It's kind of weird. I remember, somebody actually came up to me before and was like, they're like, are you Indian? I was like, yeah, and I was over here just, minding my own business, walking on the beach because I live over here in Santa Barbara. There's this guy, it's like, oh, I traveled from New Zealand and, I wanted to give you these beads, and I was like, I don't want to touch those beads. I don't know what type of medicine you put on that. I didn't tell him that. I was like, oh, I'm fine. And because he's like, no, I want my Indian name. And I was like, this guy really freaking just came up to me. I'm over here drinking coffee, walking on the beach at 9 a.m. in the morning, and he wants me to give him his Indian name. And he's all excited as if he's like a kid in the candy shop. And I'm just like, no. I told him no, and I just walked away and went straight to my car and went home.
That literally happened to my little sister and I at the horror convention. We were...
oh my gosh, story time. Come on.
And I was about to say, I had something similar happen to me too. I'll let them go first.
We were just hanging outside of a room party, and these two white guys, Isabel and I look kind of young. We're both in our mid-20s, but we look kind of young. They were in their late 30s. They came up to us, they started chatting us up with other intentions basically, and we were looking at each other like, what is happening? And then one of them looks at me, he's like, are you Indian? And I said, I'm Indigenous. I'm Ojibwe. And he's like, oh, are you? Okay. And they'd obviously been drinking. And they both go, well, what's my Indian name? And I was like, what? Sir, I'm just trying to enjoy my fruit punch here. What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah. Come on, give me an Indian name. Come on, Danny, tell her to give me an Indian name. And Danny's like, I'm a policeman. And I was like, I don't care. Izzy and I are just trying to have a good time at this horror convention. I'm not gonna give you an Indian name. And then I walked away and I was like, I don't ever want to see you. I hope life karma. I was horrified. I'm ashamed to know that this happens to a lot of us.
The fact that the three of us are sitting in this,
and we live in different...
we all had similar experiences.
And that's so interesting because we live in completely different areas. I'm from northern Minnesota. Manny is from California. And Leah, can I just say the general?
Yeah, right now I'm in St. Louis.
Yeah, and so it's
that's what happened.
Yeah, and the fact that this happens to a lot of us is not cool. I'm curious though, can I hear your story?
They were formerly called A Track Called Red, they're now called Hallucination. Great band. Everyone should listen to them. It was their concert. I was there with a bunch of there was the undergrad Native American Student Association and the one for the social work school. And we had kind of gone in junction, but they were old enough that they could drink. So I was separated from them. And this couple kind of approached me because I'm mixed and I'm more white passing than Indigenous looking. People always question me first when about stuff like this. They're like, "What are you doing here?" This very not Indigenous couple started questioning me about why I was there. I said I was Indigenous, and then suddenly they tried to give me these rocks. And I blanked out the conversation past that because I was like, no. Like Manny said, don't know the medicine, don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what you're carrying with you, so I'm not going to risk that,
Exactly. Diseases on it, eh? No.
Well, no, I feel like people carry, these energies and these spirits, and if they've been messing about for too long, they can transfer that. And so I always get kind of when people are like, hey, do you want this crystal? And I'm like, well, no. I don't know where you've been. I don't know, what you've been doing. So no thank you. And then I just kind of scamper away.
That being said too, for all you all non-Indigenous people out there listening to this, do not touch Native people's jewelry. Please, I don't care how pretty it is. Don't be touching my earrings. Don't be touching my necklace. I don't know you like that. I don't know what type of things you've been touching. Especially, right now as we have this virus going around and everything like that. Don't be touching no jewelry, period. I don't care how drunk you are, how sober, nothing like that. Because, you know what? My jewelry is good medicine. I don't need you all ruining that.
I was at this event yesterday. And I wore your ribbon skirt. I was so happy. It was so pretty. I got so many compliments, so thank you. And I was wearing my Bear Clan beaded medallion. And I only wear that on very special occasions where I need the strength of my clan. And this woman had been drinking and she came up and she stroked it. She's like, it's so pretty. And I was like, what are you doing? Please, no. Don't be touching our hair. Don't be touching our jewelry. And don't be giving us weird rocks. All right? Anyways, sorry to circle back. Have either of you seen Ginger Snaps back the beginning?
I have not, honestly.
I don't think I have either.
It's kind of a weird... Ginger Snaps was a horror film that involved two sisters, and one of them became a werewolf, and it had to deal with the whole onset of puberty, and that was the manifestation of it, and how their bond began to change because one of them was turning into a werewolf and the other one was not. The metaphors. They made a sequel, and then they made a third movie, which is supposed to be the prequel to everything, and it's actually set in a fur trading camp. Do you know what I mean? Settlement. Where it's it's the Roundeview guys, and they have the wooden camp. Yeah. And it has Cree characters in there who are hey, there's this prophecy. Two sisters are gonna come and they're gonna decide the future of werewolves. You gotta kill each other. So it's got an elderly Cree woman, and it's got a young Cree man who's in love with one of the girls. And, portrayed by Nathaniel Arcade, and I researched it, and he's actually Cree, so I was like, what if this was, written by Indigenous people? It's not. It's not. I was like, okay. Well, at least they, cast an actual, Cree person to portray a Cree character, and, casting a Brazilian woman to portray this, character. But still, we still have a lot of work to do in that area.
I think of that because emotionally I'm tied to Wes Studi because his mom taught me Cherokee when I was itty bitty. But they put that man, they're this one Indigenous man we know in Hollywood. We're going to forget the rest of them. Mm-hmm. We're going to use this one Indigenous man. We're going to put him, no matter what tribe it is, he's going to be the man.
Yeah. And I feel like they did that to Adam Beach, too. And a funny story, because this actually ties into the New Mutants movie.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, I've seen that movie.
You've seen that movie? Alright. New Mutants focuses on a bunch of teenagers who wake up in this facility and they're being tested and treated like a therapy for their newfound powers and try to get an understanding on it. Well, one of them focuses on a Northern Cheyenne character with the power to create illusions. Spoiler, I'm so sorry. This character is written by a British-born American comic book writer. She's portrayed by Blue Hunt, who is a Lakota actress who identifies as super queer, so that's really cool. And it has Adam Beach in it as her father. And the film opens up with, inside every person, there are two bears fighting for control. One is shame, greed, and regret, and the other one is peace and happiness, or whatever. As soon as the movie started...
Can I just interrupt just really quickly?
Yeah.
It's very funny because it's like every time when a movie opens up with a Native American, saying, and I researched that saying. So far, I don't know if that's an actual Indigenous belief or anything, just because I'm over here, and I know California Indian stuff, From my research online, I couldn't find anything. I just seen that instead of two bears, it's supposed to be two wolves.
It's two wolves!
Also, every time a movie opens up with some type of indigenous legend or whatever, it always ends the same way. I feel like they just give away the whole movie by doing that. That's just me, though, because that's what every movie that I've ever seen that opens up that way always ends on the same note. And I'm like, okay, this is going to play it out a little bit,
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I've never seen it with bears. I've always seen it with wolves. And you know how it's going to end because it's obviously, the animal you feed. Okay, it's a big metaphor for your soul. But if you've seen it, there's so much blatant racism that they could have written it out. And I wrote down the quotes that this actress had to hear, and she had to hear it multiple times because you can't just get a film done in one take. There's always multiple takes for each scene. What kind of Indian are you? She gets called Pocahontas. She gets called Standing Rock. This one line, you want a buffalo wing? Your people love buffalo, don't they? There's multiple more lines that, after this, I just stopped writing because I was like, somebody wrote these lines. Someone said these lines to this young girl, and she just had it supposed to portray, racism, but it goes way overboard. And I'm not trying to discount the multiple racist encounters each and every one has, on a daily basis, but you don't need to put your actress through that.
And also, when a movie or media does that, I always think about the probably non-Indigenous person who sat down and wrote most of that, or at least parts of it. If someone were to sit me down and be like, write just horrible racist stuff about any other race, I'd be like, I don't know what to say. I don't think like that.
Yeah.
The fact that someone wrote it and then they said it to her multiple times.
Yeah, it was kind of bad.
Yeah, it's just all shades of wrong, and the way when I first heard that, it got me really pissed, because, alright, I'm not gonna lie, I love X-Men, because me being a queer dude, I'm just growing up, I'm like, oh, X-Men, I can relate to them, and when I was really excited watching this film, however, when it came straight to that part where the racism came out, I was just like, yo, Hollywood updated the racism. I was just like, yo, they just gave fuel to those people out there who hate Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of them out there. I'm pretty sure you all, well, we said how we experienced racism, the different forms of racism, both indirect and direct, but in reality, all racism is direct,
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, yo, they give fuel to all those people who hate Indigenous people who are just generally racism, or racist, and they're still trying to work on that, their healing journeys. They just gave fuel in order to call us new names. And the fact that this actress said these things, saying these racist comments towards this Indigenous actress, and at the end, they portray that the racist actress basically as somebody who's like, oh, don't mess with her, she's super cool, and made her kind of be like, oh, I want to be like her. Nobody should be promoting idolizing a racist character. Okay, we're all on our different healing journeys. I understand that, and also we shouldn't be striving to be somebody who's not healthy, not only to ourselves but to others. I don't know. That's my thought on that piece right there.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, and I'm really glad you said that. We shouldn't be idolizing these people, and we shouldn't be idolizing the way that racism is portrayed. Because it also felt very force-fed. Cool. Very cool. You managed to turn a whole movement into, an insult. Thank you. So that's one of the new horror films that's out that I just wanted to bring up. But on the flip side, I have been seeing a lot of Indigenous short films come out, written by Indigenous people, portraying Indigenous people with horror themes, especially zombie stuff. And I think that's really, really exciting.
I love that. I caught wind of that, and I'm like, as it should.
Right?
Oh my gosh, I want to be a zombie in an Indigenous film.
We could totally write one. I just want to give a couple of shout out louds to The Dead Can't Dance. That's a short film about Indigenous zombies. Blood Quantum came out 2019.
I've been looking into Blood Quantum because I love an actress from there.
They're written by Indigenous people, which I really like. And then there's some other films, Rhymes for Young Ghouls, which is about residential school, These Walls, and I don't know why, but I wrote The Dead Can't Dance. And I don't know if you two have any other suggestions about films, but if not, then we can move on to other categories.
I have a suggestion. My suggestion is, you filmmakers out there, please cast me as Dead Zombie number 83. I'm and I'll bring some fry bread, eh?
Hey.
Wait, can I hop on that shout out too? Can I be zombie number 84?
I was having an interesting talk with my little sister, and she's like, I would be a final girl in a horror film. And I looked at her and I said, I would not. I would be the first person to die. I'm not very fast. I'm not very smart. In very fast situations, I just kind of let things happen, and I just don't see myself lasting a zombie apocalypse. I just gotta be truthful about that.
Hey, at least you're honest with yourself, right?
Right? I'm not a sprinter.
Yeah, that's how it would get me. I'm not a runner. I feel like giving myself credit, I think I'm intuitive enough, but I'm not a runner. And that's where it would get me.
Yeah. Should we move on to books? Should we talk a little bit more about the books that we read?
Sure.
All right. Well, Leah and I read these comic book. It's called Two Moons. It's like the Civil War, right?
Yeah, Civil War, which I thought was interesting, but I'll say that later.
Yeah, so it focuses on a young Indigenous soldier who starts hallucinating, basically. And he starts, well, it's not really hallucinating because it's the truth, but other people think that he's hallucinating.
Yeah, he's having these nightmares. And it's he thinks they're bleeding into real life when it's really just the truth. So he's like, well, this is a nightmare.
He thinks he's losing his mind, but he's actually just he's seeing the monsters that are hidden among us for what they are. These monsters are clever and they hide who they are when it's other people. I don't know how far you got.
With this, I focused on the books a little more, so
okay.
I only had time to read one issue. I love it. I love it so much.
The drawing is very intense, especially when they show the monsters for what they really are.
Yeah, I think what prepared me for the art style is actually I read most of The Walking Dead. One thing that I almost enjoyed about this is it's not exactly the same art style, but it's reminiscent. But I like Two Moons better. A little more dynamic than The Walking Dead.
So I was reading it, and I was just flipping through it, reading it intensely. And then, suddenly, there's this large panel of what the monster is, and I glance over, and I'm about to turn the page, and then I was like, what the heck? That's so scary! And, I ended up shouting it, and, my car windows rolled down, and I was like, that's very intense! Oh my gosh! And they're looking at me are you okay? And I was like, this book just got scary! I would definitely recommend checking that one out. It's an interesting concept, I feel like.
I also, in the very first issue, they do that explanation at the end of I'm the author, this is why I read this. And I actually wrote a quote from what they wrote. It was something about Indigenous people are always portrayed as hostile savages or sage custodians. The writer then went on to talk about how they really fought that. Really, I appreciated that. And because I could notice that, I realized that while reading this, I was like, okay, they're breaking Virgil out of the mold of what Indigenous characters usually are. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, it was good. I would definitely keep buying that issue.
It's one of those comics I'm going to take home to Dad, because Dad always does the weekly issues at Vintage Stock, and if you tell them, when you want a certain comic book, they'll start ordering it for you. So there's so many comics we would do that with, because we'd find really obscure ones and be like, could you order this for us?
Yeah!
So I'm planning on bringing this home for Christmas and letting Dad read and see if he wants to start ordering it.
Yeah, that's cool. I know we read another book and I'm so sorry about the mispronunciation, Taaqtumi, which is an anthology of Arctic horror stories written by mostly Indigenous people, from what I remember, right?
Yeah.
And it's a series of like short stories that have nothing to do with each other, but they're horrifying. They're like, it's truly
horrifying.
It's truly, truly horror. And they capture so many good stories in such a small volume that it's like, it's a great read. I really enjoyed reading that. I did have to put it down several times and just be like, oh, it's just a book, but like, holy. I remember the first one, it focuses on like a little girl who's walking, and it's like obviously up in the Arctic. Like a snowstorm is coming, and she remembers like her grandmother warning her, don't be alone in the snowstorm. There's something that like calls you forth, or like brings you away.
The storm is full of bad things, and they kept repeating it.
And then something follows her and like ends up being in her house, and I'm like, oh, because I was reading this late at work, and I was like, this is so scary. This is like, because part of my job is like I have to go and like make sure all the bathrooms are stocked, and I was like, I don't want to look at any more shower curtains because of this book.
This one was my favorite one, actually, because genuinely it read like something that would have been considered a classic horror story. And it genuinely, like how it ends, which I'm not going to say how it ends, but it ends. It read like something classic, and so to see Indigenous culture in something that, like I said, I felt like could have been pulled from some stuffy American literature anthology. Mm-hmm. And like, this is the one story you were excited to read, and then you read it and the whole class went wild. Like, that's what this story felt like.
I feel like it's good if you're still talking about it, and honestly, all of those stories I could go on and on about, because they were just written so well, just the different horror things that happen. I'm just like, ooh, this book, I tell you.
2,000 out of 10.
It was pretty good.
Would recommend. And it's
also,
just like how we were talking about The Only Good Indians and how it was an easy read. It also could have really helped that it was just genuinely good writing. I couldn't put it down.
Right? Exactly. Oh, I love books that it's like it's
pushed aside. I'm finishing it.
Yeah, I love books that you can just sink into, and just keep reading.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we're ready to talk about our last category, which I've been putting off to the side because it's, in my culture, it's a big no-no, but I feel like it's also the one that is, misrepresented a lot and twisted into something that it was not originally made. I do have to put out another trigger warning. I'm only going to say the full name once, and then I'm just going to refer to it as the initial. But in Ojibwe culture, we have something called Wendigos, and they are monsters made out of people who have eaten other people, and they turn into these huge, greedy creatures that only consume things. We believe that if you were to talk about it, it kind of brings one, near you. So we don't generally, it's kind of an open taboo, if you will. But originally, they're huge ice monsters, basically. No antlers, no hoof feet, not to be taken lightly, not to be joked about. And what I've been seeing more and more is that they're being portrayed with antlers. They're being portrayed with hooved feet. It's a common thing now in horror to use W's. It's just, I've seen it in video games. I've seen it in a lot of different movies. I've seen a lot of people at horror cons trying to sell me these books about it. And I'm like, I would not bring that into my house. So I just wanted to know your guys' thoughts on this. After this, I'm probably going to smudge.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But even it went so far as Marvel Comics made a character off of, W's. Wolverine goes up against them pretty often. They were featured in Supernatural, pretty scary, Until Dawn, which is a video game about it. Features them, spoiler alert. But there's no actual Indigenous people in that video game. It's just collect these totems that'll change your future. It's like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. It's still, I don't like it. Dark Was the Night. I watched that once with my father, and I couldn't, the first time we tried to watch it, I couldn't finish it. Just because I was so scared. It's about a small town, middle of winter. Something comes from the woods and starts, attacking the town. But again, Hooves, written by a non-Indigenous writer from Kentucky who openly said, I was more interested in the New Jersey Devil, and then I came across W's and I thought I'd put my own spin on it.
See, that's what upset what upsets me about the modern culture, the non-Indigenous culture around W's, is people are calling them a cryptid.
They're not cryptid. I wouldn't.
I would never say they are cryptid.
Yeah. If someone, like, because, I like to buy things with cryptid on it, like Mothman, New Jersey Devil.
Yeah, like, Mothman's a funky little dude. I think he's funny as...
But if you tried to sell me a W, like, t-shirt, I'd be like, no, thank you. That's how I feel about that.
Again, I know I mentioned this earlier, but that's a really good example of how just like Western media just tends to romanticize different things, and I know the horror community, we all been involved with the horror community for some time now, but there's certain taboos that if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. It's very disrespectful of other people's culture, and also just disrespectful in general to the thing that they're portraying, because you don't want to get the thing you're portraying, like W's, angry, because they'll come after you, if you want to get eaten, go right ahead, it's very similar, over here in California, where I'm from, we call him the hairy man, traditionally and everything. A lot of people, they always do like film crews, like we're going to go hunt for Bigfoot and stuff like those people go to the mountains and try to hunt for Bigfoot. They're like, I could do a Bigfoot call. Each time I see the little documentaries of them coming up to our mountains and trying to do that, I'm like, well, go ahead and try. He won't show himself to you. He always try to portray Bigfoot as somebody who's like evil or something that's like, Bigfoot is going to come and eat you and stuff like that. But our tribe, he's not bad. He's not bad at all. We have our own belief systems. I'm not going to say all the belief systems on here because I don't know who's out there going to try to cherry pick this and make it into some type of video. What is it? That one W video game was called Until Dawn. I don't want to Until Dusk, or something like that. But yeah, it just becomes like a novelty. That's really bad, especially for Indigenous people of that local area. People just can't just cherry pick of what they want. It's like you have to respect all of it. If you just cherry pick, then it's like, okay, well, you're not only being disrespectful to the people's culture, that you're being disrespectful to the thing you're cherry picking, and also to the land, and also to just basically everyone around you. It's something that's not really much talked about in horror films, just because everybody in the horror community is really obsessed over, either getting scared or scaring other people, or just the gore, maybe even the lore too, but there has to be, that kind of brings up the question of, like, should there be limits in the horror community? And what are those limits?
I feel like we also have Bigfoot over here, and it's like he's a very sacred spiritual being, and you don't go and mess with him. The limitations should be like, are you being respectful of everybody's culture? Are you just taking what you want and using it to make profit for yourself, which should be a big no-no? And do you have valuable input from the things that you're basing your writing off of? Are you just making stuff up as you go? And I feel like, a lot of people from horror community could really learn how to, like, start being respectful and not using these things.
It's also interesting because I've seen people get mad about it. I knew someone online who was writing a character. Oh, this is interesting. Could turn into a W.
Oh, no. No.
And got upset with me when I was, like, in the most polite way. In my opinion, politer than I should have been. That's not how that works. You really, really shouldn't be typing it. You really shouldn't be saying it. Just a fun fact. And they got mad. And I see that happening a lot in the horror community.
Mm-hmm.
Of almost this, like, possessiveness of these ideas from other cultures.
We celebrate Manifest Destiny. It is celebrated in American history books. And I feel like the same thing is happening to different cultures' perspectives on these creatures. It's just like, you can't go and claim this. It's already a thing, and just be respectful of that. I don't want to go too much into detail, but like being an Indigenous person and having that perspective, I've definitely seen some things I can't explain, and I won't try to explain to non-Indigenous people, because it's like, you either get looked at like you're crazy, or they say, and this has happened to me, well, tell me more, and then they start writing down details, and I'm like, you're not turning my personal thing into a story, okay?
Yeah.
You're not doing that. And so I get very, like, when people are always like, have you seen ghosts? Have you seen spirits? Have you seen this? And I'm always, like, very hesitant about who I talk to about these things, you know? But I feel very comfortable talking with you two. There's a lot more on each other's cultures that we haven't touched base on. Thank you, I guess, for being with me and, like, sharing these conversations. If you're searching for stories and you're looking in a good, respectful way, you know, I believe that those stories will come to you, and you'll find a way to gain access to that. But if you're looking to monopolize or make profit or, you know, gain something that's not really right from this traditional knowledge, you know, I think karma will come back and, you know, do what it does. It's just interesting how we navigate our everyday lives dealing with racism and, as queer people, you know, homophobia, transphobia, all these different layers of people trying to hurt us and break us down, and then just trying to be a decent human being along with that, and have our interests, such as horror, where we come into a lot of racism and misconceptions and a lot of twisting the facts and the truth. And so I just want to applaud both of you, and to whoever might be listening this who still has an ongoing interest in horror despite all the things that have happened to our culture because of non-Indigenous writers. Miigwech, that means thank you in Ojibwe. So I definitely don't want to monopolize the conversation and just be like, Ojibwe is the only way. You know, there's many different tribes out there, and that's why I wanted to reach out to 2 different tribes so we could get, like, a better perspective and also show that all natives are not the same. You know, we don't fit into the same keyholes. We come with different stories, different practices, and different beliefs.
I think that's really well said. I agree.
All right. Do you two feel comfortable wrapping this up?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
You're hungry, Manny? All right. All right. Well, again, thank you both for being here and taking your time to come talk with me about these horror things. I just want to give a shout out loud. This podcast was brought to life because of a grant that I had received funds from. So thank you, Northland Foundation, for putting forth the Maada'ookiing program, which is a program. If you're an Indigenous person living in most of northern Minnesota, they will help get funds to further access cultural practices, teaching other peoples the cultural ways, Indigenous economy, growing that, and furthering Indigenous businesses. So miigwech, Maada'ookiing, and all the wonderful grant people who decided to take a leap of faith in me and make this dream of a podcast come true. And thank you for all the listeners who have stuck with us. I hope you gained a lot of new knowledge, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I will be putting all the Indigenous authors and artists that we talked about in the link so you can go and seek them out and find and hopefully support them in any way you can. So, miigwech.